right now we have a new war in the Middle East. This is not a war between, you know, the United States and Iraq or Afghanistan. They didn't have that much of power to fight back. This is Iran. That's somehow different in terms of the size of the country, size of the population. Their military power is different. What is your understanding of what's going on in the Middle East?
Right. So we are in World War III right now. It's only been a week, but this war between the United States and Iran can only escalate over time. So today, there are rumors circulating online that the 82nd Airborne Division of the United States Army has been given deployment orders. They've stopped training exercises, and it is possible they will be deployed to the Middle East very soon, possibly within the next few days. The use of ground troops in against Iran would mark a massive escalation. Right now, it's mainly in air war, where the United States and Israel have air supremacy, meaning that they can strike at will against Iran. And because the costs are limited, even though America and Israel are suffering casualties, it isn't that many casualties. They're trying to avoid as many casualties as possible. And so they can theoretically retreat from this war. But the moment that ground troops go into Iran, then it is impossible to retreat. And this war can only escalate. So, a massive turning point in this conflict will be the use of ground troops. If ground troops are used, then we are in World War III, and this will mark the end of the world as we know it. A ground war would also most likely draw in other actors as well. It may draw in the GCC, it may draw in the Europeans, it will definitely draw in Russia, it may even draw in China, and it may also draw in South Korea and Japan as well, because remember, the Strait of Hormuz supplies most of the oil to the Asian economies of Pakistan, India, Japan, South Korea, and China. In fact, the Strait of Hormuz provides about 75% of all of Japan's oil needs. And the Japanese Prime Minister, Takayashi, has said that if this war continues, the Strait of Hormuz continues to be closed, then Japan will run out of oil in about 8 months' time. So we can imagine that there is panic within the Japanese cabinet, and they are actually preparing to intervene somehow in this conflict, whether it's diplomatically, whether it's economically, or even militarily. South Korea may also need to come in as well. So the Strait of Hormuz really is the nexus of the world. It is the center of all global trade. And if the Strait of Hormuz stays closed because of this war, then eventually it will draw in the entire world. You mentioned the war in Ukraine previously, and from a geopolitical perspective, this war in Iran is actually is what follows naturally from the war in Ukraine. Because from a geopolitical perspective, Russia, if it were to win the war in Ukraine, it would have control over 1/3 of the world's carbohydrates. Russia, if it wanted to, could starve the Middle East and could starve Africa. Ukraine is the breadbasket of Europe. Without Ukrainian energy and food and Russian energy, the Europeans are suffering economically. And so, if Europe is to survive, then it needs its energy from the Middle East. And so, what America is trying to do is trying to control the Middle East by strangling Iran to death. And so, in many ways, this war in Iran is a response to the Russian invasion of Ukraine. You know, Russia has complete battlefield dominance in Ukraine. This war in Ukraine is essentially lost. And so, if America is able to win this war in Iran, it will now control the energy supplies of the Middle East. It will control all the trade in the world. There's a dream of a Eurasian heartland, a grand alliance between Russia, Iran, and China. Iran is the pivot point. So if Iran were to collapse, then America would still be able to control global trade. The petrodollar would still be the dominant currency of the world. And so this is really a struggle of life and death for the American empire. And that's why, in many ways, America has no choice now but to go all in and send ground troops.
I think the big picture of the region is of importance. I know that you've been talking about the state of Israel and the agenda of the United States with the state of Israel, but from what you see so far, we had the case of Venezuela that the United States, Donald Trump came in and said that we are in control of Venezuela. Right now, in one of the latest interviews on Fox News, they're talking the same way. We have to control the oil in Iran. You know, the whole concept. How do you see the concept of Greater Israel and the concept of controlling oil?
Right. So Israel, since its founding in 1948, has always had a messianic mission to reestablish the Kingdom of David. The Kingdom of David, 3,000 years ago, was this cosmopolitan empire that controlled the entire Middle East from its strategic location in the Levant. And Israel wants to reestablish the Kingdom of David. The Israelis also believe that the Greater Israel Project is what Yahweh, their God, promised to Abraham, their great ancestor. And if you look at the Greater Israel Project on a map, if you just Google Greater Israel Project, what you'll see is that it encompasses the entire Middle East. So the ambitions, the territorial ambitions of the Israelis is vast. Greater Israel extends from the Nile to the Euphrates. So that means that Israel will eventually have to go and conquer Egypt after this war and in Iran eventually subsides. It will also have to conquer Saudi Arabia. And there's talk among some fanatical Israelis that they want to actually seize and control Mecca and Medina. The Greater Israel Project also includes parts of Turkey as well. And already the Israelis are talking about what a menace Turkey is. So Naftali Bennett, who was former prime minister of Israel and the person who is most likely to succeed Benjamin Netanyahu once he retires from the scene, he says that actually Turkey is the new Iran, right? So the idea is that we're gonna get Iran out of the way, but then we're gonna go after Turkey. Okay, so Turkey is on the agenda, as is Saudi Arabia. And really, if you look at how Israel is fighting this war right now in Iran, it's actually trying to destroy as much of the Middle East as possible. Okay, so you have this saturation, carpet bombing in Iran. So Israel is trying to destroy the Iranians' capacity to run a state, to provide basic services to its people, as well as the military capacity of the state, so that when they establish the Greater Israel Project, Iran will not be a factor. They're trying to divide Iran into ethnic enclaves that will war against each other. And Mossad agents will go into Iran and support different factions. Okay, it's divide and rule that the British Empire used to control most of the world. But if you look at what's happening right now, there's discussion. There are rumors that a lot of these drones, a lot of these attacks against the GCC countries are actually Mossad false flags. All right, so you have this drone that attacked Azerbaijan, and the Azerbaijan government said that, oh, why are the Iranians attacking us? We're going to launch a ground invasion of Iran, and the Iranians are like, this drone was not from us. And so there's rumors that it was Mossad that launched this drone attack against Azerbaijan to provoke a war between Azerbaijan and Iran. Then you have these attacks against these Saudi oil facilities which caused Saudi Aramco, the state oil supplier in Saudi Arabia, to close down. And at first, it was reported that it was the Iranians who struck these oil facilities. But then the Iranians came out and said that it wasn't us, because why would we attack the oil facilities of the GCC? If we did that, then that would provoke the Saudi Arabian government to come attack our oil facilities. So we will not do that. And now there's reporting that actually the joint attacks against Saudi oil facilities came from Lebanon, all right, from the west rather from the east. And so people now suspect that this is another Israeli false flag meant to provoke conflict within the GCC, meant to bring Saudi Arabia into the war, so that Iran would destroy Saudi Arabia's oil facilities. Okay. And then you have Tucker Carlson, who a few days ago on his show, he revealed something really, really interesting. He said that Qatari officials told him secretly that they had arrested 2 Mossad agents who were suspected of sabotage in Qatar. Okay, now the Qatari government has denied this, and we'll never know the truth, but it makes sense that Mossad would want to try to sabotage and infiltrate the GCC as much as possible, because first of all, they see the GCC, UAE, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar as eventual competitors, but also they're trying to make this war as wide as possible in order to make it easier to achieve the Greater Israel project. So that is the situation right now in Iran and the Middle East.
We are witnessing a conflict between two forces, one from the east, the other from the west. These two forces are fighting each other. One is not that much eager to fight. I'm talking about Russia, Iran, and China. Mostly they want to communicate. They started communicating with the United States. They continue these negotiations with the United States. They're trying to do their best. On the other hand, you see the behavior of the United States is mostly like the British Empire in its last years. In they want to dominate everything. They want to force each and everybody into submission. How do you see this great power game working out for the region?
Right. So as you point out, America is desperate. It's anxious. It's afraid that its empire is collapsing, and therefore it is lashing out against the world. When America won the Cold War, the entire world celebrated this. Remember when the Berlin Wall fell and the jubilation, exhilaration of the Germans when they could unify as a people. And there's great hope in the 90s that American hegemony would lead to Pax Americana, a time of peace and prosperity for everyone. And for the most part, this was true. I mean, if you were in Europe, if you were in the Anglosphere, if you were in China, then yeah, you had a very good time. But unfortunately, America started to become corrupt and arrogant. So after 9/11, America launched these wars in the Middle East for no particular reason. It destroyed Afghanistan as a viable nation state, destroyed Iraq, which in 1980s was a flourishing, prosperous middle-class nation. It destroyed Libya, it destroyed Syria, again, for no particular reasons. And so America started to become this bully in the Middle East in order to enact its certain ideas about the world, okay? And then you have this massive corruption, which led to the 2008 great financial crisis, which almost collapsed the entire global economy. So what's happening was that because America was the only hegemon, most countries of the world were sending their investments to America, and Wall Street became the most powerful entity in America. It led to the financialization of America. So it shipped its manufacturing overseas, primarily to China, and America focused on financial services. And that led to speculation, that led to gambling, that led to risky assets like derivatives. And ultimately, this system imploded in the 2008 great financial crisis. And not only did no one go to jail for all these crimes and these misdemeanors. But in fact, the financial industry was able to cement its political power over America. And this has led to, first of all, massive inequality in America, where if you are just an average person, the American dream is dead to you. You can no longer afford to buy a house. You can no longer afford to have a family. You can no longer afford to retire. It's led to massive inequality. It's also led to massive corruption, where the Washington has been completely co-opted by the financial elite. Both the Democrats and Republicans serve the financial elite of Wall Street. And the third thing is that it's led to um, complacency. It's led to arrogance. America no longer makes things; it just makes things up. I mean, America has become this fantasy land, and so yeah, so the American empire was not sustainable. But at the same time, the American empire still has the greatest military in the world, and the Russians were really the first to challenge American global hegemony by invading Ukraine. And at that time, the Americans did three things, right? The first thing that they did was they sanctioned Russia, which meant that Russia is no longer able to trade with anyone through the SWIFT system, um, the financial architecture of the world. So the SWIFT system, the Russians were banned from. Second thing that they did was split in theft, where $300 billion of Russian assets were seized by the Europeans and the Americans. $200 billion still sits frozen in European banks. A few months ago, the Europeans were discussing the possibility of using these Russian stolen money to finance the war in Ukraine. Um, and the third thing that the Americans did was blockade or ask Europe to stop buying cheap Russian energy. We know exactly what happened afterwards. Okay, the Nord Stream pipeline was blown up, and Germany was forced to pay 50% more for its energy needs from the Americans, liquefied natural gas from the Americans, and so the German economy basically collapsed, right? So um, by using its imperial powers, what America did was not really destroy Russia. Actually, America destroyed its reputation, right? Because if you can just steal money that people put in your banks, no one's going to put any money in your banks anymore. And so this has led to a massive downgrade in the power of the U.S. currency, the U.S. dollar. It's America cannibalized its own allies. Europe has collapsed economically. Germany is suffering really, really badly. And it's really emboldened the world to stand up against America. So remember, what happened after the Russian war is that the aura of inevitability and invincibility that sustained the American empire start to be broken. And then you have these nations in Africa who started to seek self-sufficiency. They wanted national sovereignty over their own resources. And so they threw out, the French colonial powers, they threw out the French military, the Sahel, right? And so we're seeing this throughout the world. And so under Trump, the response is to show the world that America still is the global hegemon and that America has no peer adversary. And that's why we saw the kidnapping of Maduro, President Maduro from Venezuela, which is a blatant violation of international law. It was a complete humiliation of the Venezuela nation state as well its people. And then, of course, remember that they paraded Maduro on the streets of New York as though he was this captured um, war prisoner. And so it's humiliating for him as well. And then after Venezuela, of course, you have this war in Iran. And this war in Iran was, again, meant to show the world that America still has it, that the American empire cannot be challenged. And now it's kind of blow up in their face, okay? But that's a background as to how this war started.
I think for many years, with the outcome of the British Empire, which is all these Arab states are the output of the British Empire. And then you see the American bases in these countries. A country like Saudi Arabia, who has a defense budget of 10 times, more than 10 times of the defense budget of Iran. And they're not even capable of defending themselves. They need American bases in their countries. Who are these Arab states, and what is the agenda? Because so far from what we've seen in this, it wasn't less than it was 7 days, 8 days that we have this conflict between Iran and the United States, this war that totally devastated all these American bases in the Persian Gulf. And that's why, the early, warning system in Israel is not working the way it was before the war started. And they're told somehow blind, and they don't know how to predict these missiles that are getting to Israel. On the other hand, you mentioned something so important, which is the invasion on the ground in Iran. That the Iranian, we had the Iranian foreign minister having an interview with NBC, MSNBC, said that we are prepared. We are prepared for them. And how do you see the whole game in the Middle East, and how this war is not a game anymore? Is the war is killing people? And
Right. So, first of all, it's important to understand that these GCC countries, they are artificial constructs of empire. Okay. So let me explain what I mean by that. First of all these nations were supported, they came into being because of the British Empire, right? So Saudi Arabia, the House of Saud, they were put into power by the British Empire as a counterweight to the Ottoman Empire. So it's this great game, and the British Empire just put their puppets into place into different Middle East countries because they knew that these countries had massive amounts of oil, and that oil would be the great wealth of the 20th century. And so it was all planned before. So all these monarchies, they owe their they owe their allegiance to empire, right? So after the British Empire fell, the American Empire replaced them, and so and then the American Empire maintained this sort of vassal relationship with these Gulf states. Now, it worked out great for these Gulf states because you were under the protection of the American military, and at this time during the Cold War, your adversary was Soviet Union, and because of MAD, mutually assured destruction, these two countries would not go to war against each other, right? And so the Middle East countries could sell oil to everyone, and so they didn't have to pay for defense, and it was making all these billions of dollars, trillions of dollars, just selling oil. So it was like the best deal in the world, and that allowed these GCC countries to expand, okay, to grow their population, to build cities. But the problem with these GCC nations is that they don't actually have the building blocks of nations. They don't have access to fresh water. 60% of their water comes from desalination plants. They don't have access to their own food. They import 89% of their food from overseas, and they don't have an indigenous population capable of 21st century knowledge economy. Okay, so they basically import their knowledge workers as well from overseas. So these are not viable nation states. And for the longest time, people were so dazzled by the wealth, the glitz of the Middle East, that people really didn't understand this fundamental issue. And so the entire GCC is just a giant mirage created by American empire as well as post-Cold War peace and prosperity. And now this Iran war, this mirage has been shattered. And now everyone understands how easy it is to destroy any of these nation states. What's happening in Bahrain right now is literally a revolution, because most of the country, or about 50% actually, is Shia minority. And they are ruled over by the Sunnis. And so there's a religious dynamic going on. And the Bahrainians are naturally sympathetic towards the Iranians, and they don't like the fact that the American Fifth Fleet is based in Bahrain. So now that there's this war going on, and now that the Iranians are striking at U.S. military bases, and now that the Americans killed the Ayatollah Khamenei, which is a religious leader, the Ayatollah is a religious leader of the Shia, like all around the world, not necessarily in Iran, and a fatwa, a religious decree has been released calling for Shia Muslims to jihad, right? And that's why you have all these uprisings in Pakistan, in Iraq, in Kuwait, and Bahrain. So Bahrain is actually on the verge of revolution. So that just shows you how unstable these countries are, even though they're extremely wealthy. UAE has had an image of being the Middle East version of Hong Kong, Singapore, New York, London, this financial hub where wealthy expats can go and not pay taxes and enjoy, Michelin star restaurants. It's a wonderful city. Dubai is a wonderful city, but again, it's just based on its reputation of being very wealthy and being peaceful and being safe. And so one drone just shattered this image, and now you have everyone trying to flee Dubai. Apparently, like luxury star hotel rooms in Dubai today go as low as like $9 US dollars. So if you want like a cheap vacation and you're looking for adventure, I would recommend Dubai. But good luck getting a flight into Dubai because the Emirates have canceled all flights because of this war going on. Okay, so the UAE is not going to last after this war. Saudi Arabia is also in a lot of trouble because Riyadh, which is a city of millions of people, and before like 30 years ago, it was a city of like a few hundred thousand. Why was it a city of a few hundred thousand? Because it didn't have access to water. It was just a desert. And so with millions of people, you need these massive desalination plants. But then you can blow these desalination plants up easily with a drone, okay, with a $50,000 drone, and completely destroy Saudi Arabia. Okay, so these GCC nations are not sustainable in the long term. Plus the fact that Saudi Arabia for the longest time has been trying to transition out of its oil economy. For the longest time, it was dependent on oil. And now in the past 10 years, they recognize that they need a knowledge economy. They recognize that they need more tourism. That's why they spent billions of dollars to bring in e-gaming, to bring in football stars like Cristiano Ronaldo, to build new attractions. They wanted to build like an indoor ski slope in Saudi Arabia in a desert. They had something called the Nome, the line, which was like literally the straight line that went across the Arabian Peninsula. And any architect could tell you like these are all just crazy dreams. And these crazy dreams were enabled because of hubris, because of all this money and wealth that was flowing to Saudi Arabia. But again, all this was just based on the belief that peace and prosperity could continue forever, when in fact the world was a much more fragile place. Not any of these nations in the GCC are actually um, real nation states with real population that wants to sustain these nation states. Okay, that's the first point. These Arab states are a construct of empire. The second point I will make is this: the American military, for the longest time, didn't actually have to fight a real war. Okay, so the last real war that I fought was probably Vietnam. The Persian Gulf War in 1991 was not a real war; it's a video game where you have these airplanes, high-tech airplanes, which were able to incinerate Saddam Hussein's soldiers. I mean, just look at the visuals from the first Persian Gulf War. It was not a real war. It was just a video game essentially. 2003, when the Americans invaded Iraq, what people don't remember is Saddam Hussein did not have any air defense. Not one, okay? Why didn't Saddam Hussein have any air defense? Because first of all, he had suffered over 10 years American sanctions, so his nation was too poor to have air defense. The second point is that he knew that he couldn't defend against an American invasion. So what was the point anyway in preparing? Like, if the Americans came, you're dead anyway. So he just gambled and felt that the Americans would not be stupid enough to invade Iraq, because if you invaded Iraq, you would empower Iran. You would make Iran the hegemon or the main power in the Middle East. And why would the Americans want to do that? Okay, so clearly Saddam Hussein was wrong. So 2003, the Iraq War was not a real war as well. So for the longest time, the Americans have not fought a real war. Now they're fighting a real war, and what we're seeing is the American military is not as strong as people believe. And the reason why is The military-industrial complex is first and foremost corrupt. It's not meant to fight wars. It's meant to steal as much money from taxpayers, using just the justification of wars, right? So during the Cold War, it was not possible for the Soviet Union and for America to actually go head to head. So what they did was they invested in very expensive weapon systems that made them look good, which cost a lot of money, which was impressive on paper, but which really didn't do anything. Okay, so really it was about flexing rather than about really fighting a conventional war, and that's what we're seeing today in the Middle East, where America has all these really impressive air defense systems, right? The THAAD system, which costs billions of dollars. You have the Patriot system. You have the Iron Dome. I mean, it's all very impressive, but look how ineffective it is against the Iranian assault. And the Iranians have told us they're actually not have yet to release their most advanced weaponry. This week has just been, the old stockpile of drones, of redundant missiles to soften the weapon systems of the air defense systems of the Israelis and Americans and the GCC. And already, Israel and the GCC are suffering massive casualties and massive damage. What this war has shown us is that the world really is a mirage. It's a hallucination. What you believe to be true is not actually true.
I think many of us are somehow confused with the concept of Israel because, after all, Donald Trump wanted to help Israel, but it seems from what we've seen so far, you see no footages coming out of Israel. And then what is happening in Israel that nobody knows, because it seems that a huge devastation is happening and nobody knows what's going on. But from Iran, we know, as you've mentioned, the footages are coming out. We know where they're hitting and what is the devastation that is happening in Tehran, for example.
Right. So there's a very good reason why there's no footage coming out of Israel. And the reason why is Israel was completely humiliated in a 12-day war. Remember, Israel really thought that it would take them like a few days to destroy Iran because their entire strategy was decapitation, right? So they went in to kill the top leadership of the Iranians. And for the first few days, it was really impressive. They were killing these scientists, these generals, these officials, these clerics in their homes. And so that showed you the extent of the Mossad network in Iran. That showed you the extent of the advancement of Israeli weaponry. And it also showed you that Israel had complete dominance over the skies. And this happened because of the fall of Syria, right? So after Syria fell to ISIS, this created this air corridor where now the Israelis can just fly uncontested directly to Iran. And before Syria was the early air defense warning system for the Iranians. That's why they had invested so much in protecting the Assad regime. So in the first few days, it seemed as though Israel was on the brink of destroying Iran once and for all. But the Iranians proved much more resilient than anyone could imagine. And the Iranians started to fire back at the Israelis. And the Israelis were actually suffering a lot of damage, especially in Tel Aviv. And the images coming out of Israel were shocking and actually humiliating. And so the Israelis basically begged the Americans to come in and save them from losing to Iran. And that's why Trump and the Iranians sort of orchestrated or coordinated or choreographed this conflict, right? Where one or two B-2 bombers went in and blew up an empty mountain. And then the Iranians struck back and attacked an empty US base in Qatar. And that was it, okay? And that was the end of 12-day war. And then if you remember, Netanyahu went to talk to Putin, okay? And asked Putin to do him a favor and talk to Iranians and said, listen, Trump says that we've taken out your nuclear weapons program, your uranium enrichment program, and that's good enough for us. So I promise you, Iran, that we, the Israelis, will not provoke another conflict. There will be peace between us. And Putin delivered that message. That was widely reported at that time. And we really thought that at the end of the 12-day war, we would have peace in the Middle East because the Iranians have demonstrated to everyone that they will fight back and they can fight back. and Israel doesn't have the capacity to actually destroy the regime, the government in Iran. Unfortunately, that's clearly not what they believe. And so what what I think they understood is, you know what, we still want to destroy the government in Iran because that's part of the Greater Israel Project. But in the future, we'll just censor media. We'll just disguise the fact that we're getting destroyed by the Iranians, and that's what's led to this blockade of information from Israel. You're absolutely right in that there's a lot of destruction. There should be a lot of destruction in Tel Aviv and other places because we sort of like see the missile barrages of the Iranians, and they're quite impressive. And but they Israelis think that, like, if we just hide the fact that we're getting destroyed, then people will think that we're still invincible. Okay, so that's a response to the loss of the 12-day war. The Israelis is like, we just won't admit we're being defeated. But I mean, right now, Israel does not have the capacity to continue this war for much longer. It needs America to send in ground troops, and that's the situation we find ourselves in.
I don't know how capable the ground troops would be, because they were begging Kurdish terrorist groups to do something for the United States. That it seems that the Kurdish people, I don't know, who are living outside of Iran, in Iraqi Kurdistan, they're going to be part of it or not. But we learned yesterday from Khan media, Israeli media, that Azerbaijan going to join us in this fight. I think they're trying you've mentioned you know the false flag operation, but we have false flag news coming out because Azerbaijan knows what at stake if they enter this conflict. It's not just about Iran. Russia would come in. The whole concept of South Caucasus would be in some sort of, Russia was fighting Georgia for before the war in Ukraine, started, and they know what's at stake, considering the South Caucasus and the case of Iran. And how do you see the whole concept? Because on one side, we know that they literally are considering ground invasion of Iran, but how capable are they to go that far?
Right. So, as you point out, the American strategy is to use proxies for a ground invasion, and that's what they did very effectively in Syria and Libya, right, where they finance these rebel groups and then support these rebel groups with air power, and that was very effective, especially in Libya, which really destroyed the government in Libya. Um, but the situation in Iran is actually much more complicated, right? So right now, the Americans are looking at three possible proxies. The first two, as you mentioned, are the Kurds and the Azerbaijanis. And the last group are the Balochs, which neighbors Pakistan. Okay, so that's the southeast corner of Iran. The Azerbaijanis and the Kurds are in the northwest corner of Iran. And the Kurds have a very long history with the Americans. The Kurds have been trying to achieve national self-determination for the longest time, and their best chance was actually in 1991, because at the aftermath of the Persian Gulf War, at that time, President H.W. Bush encouraged the Kurds to rebel against Saddam Hussein. And the Kurds did. There was a massive uprising within Iraq, and the Kurds really believed that now is the opportunity to finally build their own nation. But at the end of the day, what happened was that President George H.W. Bush betrayed the Kurds, and the promises of American air power to support their insurgency never materialized. And what happened was a massive crackdown. Saddam Hussein, I think, used it was just a brutal crackdown that killed hundreds of thousands of Kurds. And if you're the Kurds and you remember this, right? Why would you ever trust the Americans again? And this was not actually the first time. It's happened before, and it's happened like many times afterwards. So the idea that you're gonna give money to the Kurds and they're gonna rush into Iran on your behalf, I think that's a fantasy. Okay, that's point number one. Point number two is the entire intention of using Kurds is as a cannon fodder. Okay, so what you want to do is you want to mask Kurdish insurgents and send them into Iran. And what will happen is the Iranian military will be forced to send in soldiers to counter this attack. And these soldiers will be mass, right? Which makes it perfect for aerial bombardment. But guess who else gets killed in this aerial bombardment? It's the Kurds as well. So it is, these are, this cannon fodder, that meant to bait the Iranians into conflict so that they can all be destroyed. And the Kurds aren't stupid. They know exactly what's going on. And the reason why they seem as though they're willing to go in is because they can probably rip off a lot of money from the Americans and Israelis, right? They can probably get a lot of weapons, a lot of money, a lot of gold, and a lot of assurances from the Israelis and the Americans. But the idea that these guys are going to go in and sacrifice their lives so that Israel and America can advance their military objectives is just absurd. No one's that stupid. And then you have like Azerbaijan, right? Why the hell would Azerbaijan get into this war, especially because Russia's to the north, right? Why give the Russians and the Iranians the perfect excuse to split your nation into two? If the president of Azerbaijan is stupid enough to actually enter Iran with a ground invasion, I guarantee you that Azerbaijan as a nation state will not last very long. Russia is looking for the perfect excuse to come in this war to create a land bridge between Russia and Iran. So there's no way Azerbaijan comes into this war. But again, it's good optics, right? The president of Azerbaijan can flex, can huff and puff. The Israelis and Americans will pay him a lot of money. He'll take this money and give it to all his hangers-on, all his supporters, all his cyclophons. That makes him look good, okay? But the way these guys are not stupid, they're hustlers. They know exactly how the game works. They know that the Israelis and Americans are desperate for ground forces to advance their military objectives, and they're not going to sacrifice themselves, and they're not going to sacrifice their lives. They're not that stupid. But in the process, they can rip off as much money as possible from the Israelis and Americans, and that's exactly what's going to happen.
Jiang, one of the main questions in the mind of the Arab states today is what is the benefit of American bases in our countries? And they're asking themselves, many people in these countries, wealthy people, are asking, what is the outcome of these bases if they're not defending us, if we're gonna, we are attacked because of these bases. So, how do you see the Middle East, the outcome of this conflict, this war, and the influence that it already has on these Arab states?
Well, I mean, like, listen, for the longest time, these GCC countries had a devil's bargain, right? So the devil's bargain is this. You have these corrupt regimes supported by American military. The American military was not in these nations to protect the nation. It was to protect the royal family, to make sure the royal family obeyed orders coming from Washington, D.C. These GCC nations are really the linchpin of the American empire, where they sell petrodollars and then recycle these petrodollars into the American financial system. The AI bubble right now in the United States, it's completely financed by the GCC nations, right? The entire American economy now depends on the building of data centers, which are not very profitable and which are very bad for the environment. And so the GCC nations aren't able to finance the building of these data centers. An entire Ponzi scheme, this financial pyramid, this mirage of AI economy collapses. Okay, these ruling families are corrupt, they're arrogant, they're dictatorial, and they use these petrodollars in order to bribe the citizens as well. So if you're a citizen there, you get free healthcare, free education, free housing, a free job. You have nothing to worry about, okay? And then you import, um, um, you know, workers from India, from Bangladesh, from the Philippines, wherever to do the real work. You hire expatriates from Europe, from England to be the middle managers. And so they had a very nice deal for the longest time. And now what they're recognizing is, oops, our time is up. This devil's bargain is not going to last very, very longer. Listen. I mean, I don't want to be too rude, but I don't think there's a future for any of these nations after this war.